Welcome to the Robert Hunt Financial Market Update. It's your host, Robert Hunt, where I look at the week's financial news that can be a bit confusing, misleading, and take you off course and help to make it actionable, understandable, and clear. What a week, and therefore, what a show. I know many of you are focused on the OU-Texas game or the Texas-OU game, however you want to call it. Thank you for being a listener. I'd like you to dial in. Don't be distracted by the football that's coming, and focus with me. We've got 3 great articles, important lessons for you to take home. You might want to gather the children around the radio because these are some doozies. So at the top, we're going to be looking at a bet that was made. Warren Buffett made a bet that the S&P 500 would beat a various amalgamation of hedge funds. Wouldn't you know it, it did. This article on CNBC kind of goes back and says, what shall we do with this information? It's got some good takeaways. We then look at a legal case that we have followed on this podcast with great clarity because we want you, the listener, to understand what's going on. This is a case where a JP Morgan client lost $50 million, and the client claimed it was due to dementia, and JP Morgan should help pony up, pay the money. Let's see what we think. And then in closing, Mr. Scott Burns, one of our favorites, a friend of the show, sent this article over. Retirement may be more comfortable than you think. Oftentimes, you're told to worry. Hopefully, Mr. Burns' article helps assuage some of your concerns. At the top, Warren Buffett, this is an article came out Wednesday, October 9th, by Lori Kunish. Headline, Warren Buffett's S&P 500 bet paid off. Experts weigh in on whether it's still a winning strategy. So, by way of review, Warren Buffett, he had a decade-long bet that he put out on some, I forget the website, some probability website, asking for takers. Hey, all these hedge funds are claiming they can beat an index fund. Go ahead. Put your money where your mouth is. The winner, which I think everyone put in $1 million, Buffett put in $1 million, and this amalgamation of hedge funds did. The winner gets the money to go to their charity of choice. Well, wouldn't you know it, the hedge funds actually trounced. So this is in 2007. Buffett makes this $1 million bet. Hedge fund takes him up on it. The S&P 500 smokes him. No surprise. He kept the cost low, investing simple, time rising long. The hedge fund, if you remember, costs were high, investing was complex, time horizon was short. So the do-nothing hedge fund beat the army of analysts at the hedge fund. Again. So this article goes through and says, well, in 2024, this is interesting, VOO, which is the S&P 500 exchange traded fund for Vanguard, was one of the leaders of the funds attracting new money, $71 billion in net inflows for the first 9 months. Yikes. That's nuts. This beats the record that SPY, which is another S&P 500 ETF index fund, set in 2023 by $20 billion. So, guys, if you're on the index fund bandwagon, things are going well. People are waking up. The S&P 500 index makes new highs. Isn't that great? So, what is this article warning us about? It's telling you to do something different. It's saying, hey, that was great for Buffett from that time period. They're trying to argue, hey, what if it was just a special decade? What if that time-tested strategy at the Market Update podcast, what if 2007, 2017 was just a weird period? Believe it or else, when they interviewed this hedge fund manager, he said as much. He said, yeah, it just wasn't a good decade for our strategy. Notice what he did not confess to, which is that, hey, my fees are high. My strategy was complex. I was short term. All the things that we know on this podcast makes for great investing. It's not what they said. Not what they said. They said, yeah, it was just a good decade for that particular strategy. Well, I like this article in the end. It basically just talks about, hey, there are reasons why the S&P 500 index has been great. It is simple. The article says that. Well, great. They get that. It attests to the fact that, hey, it could have just been large cap tech. That's an accusation I'm hearing lately. Like, hey, wow, index funds are great. That's just because you're overweight large cap tech. Large cap tech meaning Amazon and Apple and Meta and Google. They're saying, and now I guess NVIDIA, they're saying, hey, look, this is a goofy decade. If large cap tech did poorly, the index fund would do poorly. Well, I mean, okay, maybe. It's still timeless. The reasons why it outperforms are still timeless. The market is pretty good at saying that, hey, large cap tech should be worth a lot. Now, one of the risks they're saying is, hey, you can buy, and I tell folks this, the S&P 500 is a wonderful index. You can stick with it forever and ever, amen. There is a total U.S. stock market index, ticker VTI instead of the VOO I mentioned earlier. VTI might have 3,000 securities and offer you a little different investment mix because it's got that 20% of the mid cap and small cap to slightly differentiate your returns. I don't think it makes a ton of difference, but the article says, hey, look, you can help mitigate the risk a little bit. What I see in this is you don't have to change anything. The reasons, the ingredients for the recipe on the index funds beating these group of hedge funds, they're not changing. I don't care what large cap tech in the U.S. does over the next decade. Still going to be cheap, still going to be simple, still going to be tax efficient, still going to be long-term oriented. That's what we're focused on. That's how you do well. So this is how I've heard this a lot lately, which is like, hey, great. Hey, y'all had a great run, Mr. Index Fund. This is good on you this past decade, but buckle up for this next one. You're going to need to be alternatives and private strategies and long short funds and options and hedging and buffering because it's going to be choppy waters. You just keep calm and carry on. Don't change. Stay diversified. Now, I'll mention that. That's a little, you always got to stay diversified, but keep calm and carry on. Next up, a J.P. Morgan client. This is a case we followed now for, it's been going on forever. Some of these legal cases, they make me tired reading about them. This one's been going on so long. I think this is the end of it, though. J.P. Morgan client lost $50 million fortune amid dementia. They were denied trial. The article explains. This is in Fortune.com. A once wealthy J.P. Morgan Chase client whose portfolio crumbled as he slid into dementia lost a legal battle seeking to recoup his fortune from the bank. A federal judge in Boston threw out a lawsuit filed by Peter Dolger, 87, and his wife Yoon, accusing the firm of keeping him in an inappropriate investment. In a ruling unsealed Friday, the judge said it doesn't appear J.P. Morgan knew about Peter's deteriorating cognition over the years in which he lost a fortune. The firm had pegged at more than $50 million. So we can just at the top say, it hurts. So what's to learn here? Now, as I read further about this case, and this article explains further, it really appears like J.P. Morgan kind of dotted their I's and crossed their T's. No surprise that some of the safeguards at the J.P. Morgan actually did pick up on what this guy was doing. They actually made this gentleman sign a letter, Mr. Dolger, Peter Dolger saying, hey, I'm taking incredible risks. And this letter explained, and the bank thinks I should diversify further. I know the risks I'm taking. He signed that. And this is where families are very important. So who knows whether this gentleman would have listened to his family at all, but families, friends, this gentleman effectively risked the entirety of his net worth on master limited partnerships, oil and gas master limited partnerships, and he timed it poorly. So MLPs is the acronym. In 2015, he had over $30 million invested in these MLPs. That's when J.P. Morgan kind of triggered this letter. Well, MLPs got absolutely slaughtered after that. He somehow, it says in this article, went to zero. I don't. He must have done something else. But the big case here was, hey, J.P. Morgan, you're liable. I wasn't of sound mind, despite signing all these letters. Judge says, nope, you signed these. J.P. Morgan had no way of actually knowing that. What we're doing here at the market update, though, is asking the bigger question here is, how do you lose $50 million? So master limited partnerships are vehicles that pay out the vast majority of their income, so they're higher yielding, and these oil and gas master limited partnerships pay out pretty high yields. Typically, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if when he was investing, it was over 10% yields. So if you got $50 million, if what you can potentially consider is, this gentleman may have said, hey, I can make $5 million a year passive, put money in MLPs, or I can be a fuddy-duddy index fund knucklehead and make a fifth that. Make 2% or something all of a sudden. And then it's not exciting at all. It's like $1 million. Okay. Because 1% of 50 million is $500,000. So all of a sudden, we can convince ourselves. So let's put ourselves in Mr. Dolger's shoes. We can convince ourselves a whole lot of financial truths if greed or fear take over. And I suspect greed took over here. I don't know that. But for someone to put their entirety of their net worth into as risky an investment as this, to sign a letter that J.P. Morgan put forward, by the way, they're making buku fees on all these deals. If they put a letter forward and made you sign it that said, hey, this is a lot, you're taking a lot of risk. And oh, by the way, you can't hold us liable for any of the losses that may come. So they did something. Now, one of the mistakes Mr. Dolger made, in my opinion, was going to a big bank for financial advice. I think it's a bad idea. The longer I do this, the more convinced I am of simple truths. That's one of them. It is unlikely you will get objective advice from a large bank. Now, Mr. Dolger, in J.P. Morgan's defense, could have just been using them for transactions, and he may have been aware they weren't actually advisors of his. What I've seen in practice is typically, I'm not saying J.P. Morgan to this, but any of these large institutions, they give the veneer of advice. The environment they create makes you conclude they're your advisors, not a salesperson. In the end, $50 million is gone, and we can remember that money is something you cannot put your hope in. Here today, gone tomorrow. So if Mr. Dolger can lose $50 million in a couple years in oil and gas master limited partnerships, you and I can lose money too. We're going to do our best not to, but let us not put our trust in money. It can go away quick. And in closing, Mr. Scott Burns, he's one of our favorites. He's one of these gentlemen who announced his retirement, I think, years and years and years ago, and keeps writing. I'm glad he does. He is our expert on retirement because he's been doing it for a while. I believe he's in his 80s now. He has this article, Retirement May Be More Comfortable Than You Think, by Scott Burns, October 6th. He talks about cruises. I do like cruises. So he is on a Holland America Line cruise ship. It eases into its Boston dock, he says. And he's traveling with another couple. They've been on it for a week. All these great places. He said the ship's almost fully booked. He just talks about some of the joys of his own retirement. Now, what he talks about is, hey, this is great. And by the way, it didn't cost that much. This is Holland America. He says that these other cruises are the Regents of the world, the Seabourns of the world. He's not doing that. He's doing Holland America, but had a great time. But what he points out is, hey, amidst all these smiling faces he sees on the cruise ship, why do I read so many articles about hand-wringing in retirement? About how there's this there's this wave of people who do not have sufficient funds to retire. What's going on? So, but he went into some survey data that I found interesting. A recent Kiplinger's article revealed that 74% of retirees feel comfortable. I'll read it again, 74%. Comfortable, and this is Burns' words, yes, comfortable, a word seldom seen in media reported on the elderly. Citing a Gallup survey that has been done regularly since 2012, the big finding is that retirees feel good about retirement. Those anticipating retirement are worried. Check this. This is the big distinction. Only 45% feel they'll have enough money. Just check that gap out. So that's 74% in retirement say all good. The ones before it say 45% they'll have enough. So why the gap? Burns is saying the financial services industry is pounding, fear-mongering about you're not going to be able to do it. You don't have enough. Save. Of course, they will make money on that. And what Burns is saying is, hey, those calculators, those retirement calculators, and that some of that anticipated spending is way overshot. And he's a retiree. He should know. Anecdotal data as it is. It's just one man. But he says, hey, you got lower expenses when your children are grown. You got a paid off mortgage, hopefully, little or no debt. Your work expenses are gone. That's actually a big one. No employment taxes, lower cost of health care, lower tax bill. So there's a whole host of expenses that retirees, once they're retired, they realize go away. But prior to that, it's difficult to believe. Difficult to believe. So Burns is encouraging us, hey, life is actually great. It can be done. You don't have to be a Bezos, Gates, or Musk. He talks about how the media will show you all the toys of these folks, and it also doesn't help with this dynamic of all the folks who are worried. He reminds us of this fact. I'll quote him here. Even the poorest Americans enjoy things that weren't available to kings only 150 years ago: indoor plumbing, central heat, fast private transportation, safe food, and good health care, to name a few. Did I mention living twice as long, he says. So he also mentioned Social Security. I've found this dynamic too. A lot of retirees, they don't consider Social Security. It's one of these, hey, maybe it'll be there, maybe it won't. I'm pretty sure it's going to be there. I'll put it in my retirement planning for people. It's a big deal. If you've got a work history, it ends up being a substantial portion of money for you. So Burns reminds us that you can actually be doing better. So this is Burns being candid with us. He says, the Burns family net worth and income are nicely higher than they were 20 years ago. We measure in the top 5 to 10% of households for income and net worth. Despite all that, Social Security is our largest source of income. Wow. 60% of retirees cite Social Security as a major source of income. So I find that in practice, retirement calculators can be helpful. They can sharpen the census. They can at least give a ballpark estimation for how things go. But there's these fixed variables that are very difficult to predict in those financial calculators. If you've ever tried one, I may link one in the show notes. Vanguard took away my favorite one. I don't know why. I messaged them and they just said, it's gone. Who knows? But there are others out there. But I think Burns is onto something. I think we're adaptable creatures as humans. God's given us the ability to adapt to a changing environment. And so if you do encounter a lower income situation, you can adapt. It's not always easy. But what Burns is, I think, arguing for is be careful about a lot of hand-wringing in your life related to retirement if you actually are on the right path. And now someone, you may need help with someone outside of your own family to tell you whether you're on the right path or not. I think it's more important to be on the right path, which is a savings rate, maybe 10%, maybe 15%. Ramsey says 15% should go into retirement. I think we can be flexible. I think some of these retirement calculators are too rigid, and we have at times too much angst. Too much. A lot of people don't consider their home equity or Social Security at all in their retirement planning, and those are important variables. So, amidst all that, let's focus on what we can. And what is that? That's keeping our costs low, our investing simple, and our time horizon long, because that's what's going to give you the best shot on your investing journey. Until next time.